Hey, Jack Spirko here with another survival podcast video. Today we're going to do phase 2 of our 3-part series on Biltong. And this is what I ended up with here, guys, after all of that cutting yesterday. I showed you the first part of it and figured once you knew how to do it, there was no reason to do it all. I actually did end up with a lot of extra meat. That roast, or those 3 big roasts that were on sale, actually had a lot of small cube pieces that I was left over with. And that ain't going to make really good biltong, so we're going to make stew out of this. So on a good buy on meat, we ended up with a pile of biltong and a bunch of meat. There's probably about 2.5 pounds of beef there. That'll make us a nice pot of stew a little bit later today. Biltong itself, yesterday we remember what we put on here. We put salt, which we use coarse ground sea salt. You can use that, you can use kosher salt, but you don't want to use fine grained salt. It's way too easy to overdo. We used coriander and we used black pepper. If you look at the meat now, it was all glistening in salt crystals yesterday. It was all glistening with salt crystals yesterday. Today, we don't see hardly any salt on it at all. And that's because it's all, melted down and been absorbed by the meat, which is exactly what we want. The meat that actually was on the top that wasn't kept wet, I can already feel it starting to dry. And I often taste the meat at this state. And some people, I think are squeamish on that, but there's not really much difference in tasting it now or tasting it after it cures. It's already begun its curing process. What's really amazing is just sitting like this meat gets very, very tender. If you take a raw piece of beef and you see how that feels if you eat it, or even if you just feel it in your fingers, and you feel this after a day, the muscle fibers have begun to break down. That's not to say that biltong is tender, because it's actually really dry and kind of mummified-like. It turns almost black, as you'll see in the next phase. But all I'm going to do is lay out my biltong. I don't want it touching. It might touch a little bit, and I'll fix it later because I'm going to have to move this dehydrator out to the garage anyway after we're done filming. But one of the things we're going to have to do, this is a 9-tray Excalibur dehydrator. And we can't use all 9 trays. We can only use 4 because the meat is so thick compared to something like jerky. And that's what another thing I wanted to do. I wanted to show you guys basically yesterday how thick we had the meat yesterday and how it's already begun to shrink in size as the salt has begun to actually pull the moisture out of the meat. So there's 1 tray. That'll go off in our dehydrator. I'll put that on the second tier. That way there'll be enough space in between them to dry out. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get all my meat into the dehydrator. We'll see here. But remember, what I want to do is I'm going to hang some of this in my office like I usually do anyway. And we're going to see how they come out. And see, that's a really thick piece right there. That's thicker than I usually do myself. I guess I didn't get the knife on that one. But this is going to come out just fine. I actually prefer thicker biltong. It makes it easy to leave it a little bit moist in the center. I think we're going to have no trouble getting everything but a few pieces I'm going to hang up. I'll have to pick a few pieces out to hang up. See, there's some of these are really, they're big this way, but that's a piece that ended up thinner that way. But remember, what I want to do is I'm going to hang some of this in my office like I usually do anyway, and we're going to see how they come out. And see, that's a really thick piece right there. That's thicker than I usually do myself. I guess I didn't get the knife on that one, but this is going to come out just fine. I actually prefer thicker biltong. It makes it easy to leave it a little bit moist in the center. I think we're going to have no trouble getting everything but a few pieces I'm going to hang up. I'll have to pick a few pieces out to hang up. See, there's some of these are really, they're big this way, but that's a piece that ended up thinner that way. But I think we'll go ahead and wrap up there because you don't need to watch me put the rest of it in. But there you go. That's all there is to this part. We're going to take that. We're going to set that in the Excalibur. I'll hang a couple pieces up in my office. When you do hang it up, you want to make sure the pieces that you're hanging are, again, like I said yesterday, you don't want them touching each other. You want the meat strung out. The way I usually do is I get a rope, I tie a bunch of knots in it, and I put some little hooks that I make out of paper clips, hang that up. Once that's done, this will take about 7 to 15 days of hanging in the office. The stuff in the dehydrator, I have no idea how long it's going to take. I've never done it this way before. Again, this was a recommendation from a listener. I am going to try to stay as traditional as I can, and the lowest setting on the dehydrator is 95 degrees, which should be just about perfect. So I'm going to run this at 95 degrees. We'll compare the 2 results in the next phase. Okay, well, I'd say about 8 days has passed since we put the biltong up to dry, maybe 9 days. It was done in about 5, and because of that, not a lot of it's left already. We've been at it, but unlike the video I did in the members brigade, I didn't break down all the biltong before finishing up the end of the video. These are 3 pieces that I had hung up using the traditional method, and you can see how they've come out. And I'll do a little bit of zooming with the software on these, but over here is the stuff from the dehydrator, and I'll tell you, you might think it's hard to tell any difference because of the camera. It's almost impossible. I really can't tell you that using the dehydrator made things any better or any worse with the end product. What I'll tell you though is if you have a dry climate, if you have an air-conditioned home, if you can set up just a fan to keep air movement, there's no reason to use a dehydrator. In fact, the dehydrator didn't even get the job done faster than than just hanging it up. It looked like it was going to smoke out, just smoke the traditional method in the first day. One day into it, it looked almost like this, not quite as shrunk up, but it almost had this exact look to it. The stuff hanging up was still malleable on the outside, so it looked like it was drying way ahead of it. About 3 days into it, the stuff that was hanging was a little bit moist on the inside, but quite good to eat. And if you broke it open and looked at where it was moist on the inside, it was black the way this is. It was cured. And it tasted pretty good, even though it wasn't fully done yet. This all took about 5 days, both of these, to be really done the way it is now, nice and hard. And I'll show you that if you bend this, it breaks, right? Here's the deal. What happened was, by using the dehydrator, the outside dried so fast, it was almost like when you take meat and put it on the grill. You put it on the grill at a really high temperature, and you sear the outside, and it holds the moisture in. Well, that's what happened because the outside dried so quickly, it took just as long for it to catch up, running the dehydrator non-stop, as this stuff did, because since this dried by the traditional method, the moisture was slowly wicked out instead of dried off the surface. So, less energy input, less trouble, less hassle. I'm going back to my traditional way to make biltong. That said, if you live somewhere like the Pacific Northwest where you don't use air conditioning, and you live in a humid climate, and you happen to have a dehydrator, your end product's going to come out almost exactly the same. I would actually say this is a little bit over-dried, and it tastes a little bit like I used a little bit too much salt, where the stuff that came out of the hanging, it doesn't taste like I used too much salt. It's actually a little bit better, but so close you're not really going to know the difference. So there you go. That's how you make biltong. You can do it with a dehydrator. You can do it with a biltong box, or you can just hang it in an air-conditioned room. And if you have a real dry climate, I mean, you can hang the stuff outside from a tree, and it'll do the same thing. I mean, that's how they did it for thousands of years on the African plains. Give biltong a try. I think you'll decide you like it a hell of a lot more than jerky. I'm going to let you go now. I got biltong to eat. Maybe I'll come back in the future and show you a way you can actually use biltong in cooking.